All right, as promised in my other announcement video, this video is about some of the ideas and issues that we talked about on the What is History discussion as well as on Twitter for Unit 1. Please do let me know which way of me providing information to you makes the most sense with Brightspace, I should say. What I mean by that is there are the announcements, there's this activity feed. I also have the ability to send emails, which I'm going to do today as well, just to give you a reminder and an update on what's coming due. But I'm just trying all of these things out because I'm not sure from your perspective which ones sort of make the most sense. I am using them in slightly different ways, but again, just please let me know, respond to my email or respond here in the comments in the activity feed to let me know which way of me conveying information to you is most helpful. All right, thinking about the study of history, I really enjoyed all of your various definitions of what history is. You all delved in pretty well into thinking about historical thinking, the skills that are involved, for thinking critically about the past. So we are focused on critical thinking in history, but it's a specific type of critical thinking that involves those 5 C's that we read about, involves kind of having ourselves put in the shoes of people who lived in the past, and then thinking critically in terms of context, in terms of change over time, in terms of continuities, in terms of contingencies and complexities about how people have interpreted past events. So most of you, pointed out that history is not set in stone because we're always finding new things. And the way I'm talking about this, it's also because we're always adding new interpretations. We're better figuring out how to find perspectives that were not included in past interpretations. So something we'll see a little bit as we study the Pueblo Revolt in Unit 2 is that in the early 20th century, historians were super focused on the Spanish perspective of that event, and also they were pretty Eurocentric, thinking about the Spanish perspective as the important one, not really treating the Pueblos as anything more than people who, if they were given the recognition as being people, who needed to be quote-unquote civilized and brought into Christianity. So our ways of looking at the world around us at a given time shape the way that we look at our past and define what we can know about it. Since that time, we've added different perspectives from oral histories to better understand the Pueblo side of those events. Historians have read more critically Spanish interrogations of Pueblo participants in the revolt. So there are all these various ways that historians are trying to get at that different perspective that, because of relative power relations, was discounted and omitted and silenced. And so we have to always remember that when we're talking about history, there's this tension between history as what happened and history as what was said to have happened. That idea comes from a Haitian historical anthropologist whose name was Michel Trouillot. His book, Silencing the Past, is excellent if you ever have the time or inclination to read something about the ways that we study the past and the reasons that certain perspectives are often silenced and omitted, and how we can try to put those back into the record. So those are concerns that historians have at this point. I wanted to read a few comments that some of you made about history in terms of defining it, in terms of thinking about historical thinking, that really stuck out to me and that I found insightful, got me thinking in different ways. Sal defined history as stories as told by people through their perspective. Stories are important to history. Historical evidence, we call it evidence, but it's not like forensic evidence. It's not the scientific thing that can be kind of cultivated in a lab or in a beaker. Instead, historical evidence is the written, oral, video recorded, sometimes through artifacts, these things that people left behind that tell a certain story about how they understood their time and their place. So as historians, we're using evidence that is imperfect. Primary sources are extremely imperfect. They're almost always biased in one way, shape, or form. And so that's why historical thinking is so important. We have to recognize those biases. We have to recognize our own biases as researchers and build an interpretation of past events that provides the fullest picture possible, that takes into account as many voices as possible, and that recognizes that even as we're applying historical thinking skills, we recognize that we're not objective. Historians are human beings. And so any historian who says this is the objective truth, I think that should be a red flag. It always is to me. Because that means this person has not recognized their own perceptions of the world, their own worldviews, and the way that those shape their interpretations. Instead, historians who situate themselves, I gave the example of Richard White in chapter 1 in our textbook, those are what I look for. They explain, this is how I came to this topic, this is how I'm thinking about it, these are the questions I'm asking, because maybe if we asked different questions, we would get different stories, we would get different perspectives. Questions can both broaden and limit the kinds of narratives that we create as historians. And so again, those are things to look for. And so I really like this focus on story and on perspective as defining the past. Marissa said history is a collection of memories of events being told through the perspectives of others. So hers adds that layer of memory. As we know, as human beings, our memories are imperfect. Memories change over time. And so it's, as we'll see in Unit 2, it's often really easy to be critical of oral histories, and we should be critical of all primary sources. But we need to make sure we're being equally critical of things like memory and things like written sources. Just because something was written down doesn't mean that it is perfect and that it tells the exact truth. Instead, it has a certain purpose and a certain perspective to offer. Let's see. All right. Oh, I like the way Tristan characterized history as saying it cannot be set in stone because we were not there and we did not see it with our own eyes. Even if we were, we would have to know the backstory from each individual point that influenced the event and find out more and more information as years passed. So this kind of speaks to an example that I've given before in face-to-face classes where, imagine that we were all of us in class were witnesses to a car accident. We would tell different accounts of that accident based on our unique perspectives on it. Some of us may have had our backs turned to it, but might still have heard something. Some of us may have seen the whole thing from start to finish, but from different angles. So again, we would all have different ways of describing that event. Same is true with primary sources, and we have to keep that in mind. Angelica reminded us that in the past, histories of indigenous peoples have been deemed unimportant by Europeans and by Americans, I would add, and later forgotten to be added to history books. And sometimes those were purposely erased and left out. And again, that has to do with power relations. There's that adage that victors write history. I think that the reality is a little bit deeper than that, and it has, again, more to do with who's in power, who gets to privilege their perspective and their voice over others, and what reasons do they have for doing that. Why are and why have indigenous perspectives often been left out? We're trying to add those back into our understanding of New Mexico history. We're trying to understand those as, at least myself personally, as an outsider. I need to recognize that I'm not an indigenous person, and so I need to be very careful and respectful and humble about the ways that I interpret those stories. All right, so the video, as I'm often want to do, is dragged on a little bit, but again, I wanted to emphasize those ideas. Those were just some things that stuck out to me that I made note of, but as I read all of your ideas, I was very impressed. I was thinking a lot. I really love thinking about these kind of big picture issues of how we know what we know and how we can understand the past. So thanks for your hard work thus far. I'm looking forward to continuing our work together, and I hope you're having a great day.